You'd probably be killed by your breakfast, or the water you drank with it, or the building you slept in, or the doctor you stupidly trusted when you started feeling sick, or just the air. The thick, hot, absolutely catastrophic air of a city that had never once in its entire history heard the phrase basic sanitation. We have been lied to about Rome. For centuries, we've been sold this gleaming marble fantasy. Senators in togas debating philosophy, legions of warriors conquering the known world, engineering marvels that still stand 2,000 years later. And yes, all of that happened. But it happened on top of something else entirely. Something darker. Something filthier. Something that would make most modern people break down crying within the first hour of arriving. Rome wasn't a civilization. It was a survival challenge, and today, we're finding out exactly why almost nobody would pass it. Stay with me, because it gets so much worse than you're imagining right now. It's 100 AD. Rome is untouchable. The empire stretches from the freezing shores of Britain to the scorching deserts of North Africa. Over 50 million people under one flag. The city of Rome itself holds over 1 million inhabitants, making it the largest city in the Western world by a distance that no other civilization even came close to matching. On paper, breathtaking. The monuments, the roads, the aqueducts, the political system that would go on to inspire governments for the next 2,000 years. But here's the thing about Rome that the history books consistently, suspiciously glossed over. Every grand monument had a shadow. And living in that shadow, crammed into crumbling apartment buildings, wading through streets that functioned as open sewers, eating food that was one bad decision away from killing them, was the other Rome. The real Rome. The Rome that 90% of the population actually inhabited every single day. Rome had two realities running simultaneously. The Rome of the patricians, the wealthy elite, with their heated floors, their private gardens, their elaborate dinner parties, where the food alone cost more than a poor family earned in a year. And then the Rome of everyone else. The plebeians, the slaves, the forgotten millions who built the empire, cleaned the empire, fought and died for the empire, and received almost nothing in return. No running water in your home, no sanitation, no legal protection, no safety net of any kind. Just the city, the crowd, and whatever combination of luck and stubbornness kept you breathing until tomorrow. That second Rome is where we're going today, and it is nothing like the brochure. Let's put you there, right there, 100 AD, city of Rome, and you've just woken up. The first thing that hits you, before your eyes even fully open, is the smell. And I want you to understand that no description I give you is going to fully prepare you for what this smell actually was. Because in ancient Rome, there was no sewage system for ordinary people. What that meant in practice was that every household collected their waste in pots overnight, and every morning those pots were emptied, out of the window, into the street below. There was literally a Roman law requiring people to shout a warning before throwing their waste out the window. Which tells you two things. First, that this happened constantly enough to need legislation. And second, that the legislation clearly wasn't working, because if it had been, there wouldn't be quite so many Roman texts complaining about being hit by falling waste while walking to the market. The streets of Rome were open sewers. Human waste, animal waste from the horses and donkeys and livestock moving through the city, rotting food, discarded animal parts from the butchers and markets, all of it, just sitting there, baking in the Mediterranean sun. The smell alone would hospitalize most modern people within minutes. And this was just the smell. The diseases hiding inside that smell were a different conversation entirely. Waterborne illness was basically a subscription service in ancient Rome. The wealthy had relatively clean aqueduct water. Everyone else was playing Russian roulette with every sip. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera. Intestinal parasites so common that archaeologists find evidence of them in virtually every Roman site ever excavated. Nobody understood why people kept getting sick. Germ theory was still 1,800 years away. So the cycle just kept going. Drink, get sick, die, repeat. Now add the housing situation. Unless you were wealthy, you lived in an insula, a Roman apartment block. Multi-story, sometimes 6 or 7 floors high, built as cheaply and as quickly as possible to pack in as many bodies as the structure could theoretically hold before it stopped being a building and started being a pile of rubble. No fire regulations, no building codes, no inspections. Insulae collapsed regularly, sometimes taking entire city blocks with them. Fire was worse. No running water on the upper floors, no real fire brigade. Buildings packed so tightly together that a single cooking flame could level a neighborhood overnight. The historian Juvenal wrote about the constant low-level anxiety of living in these buildings. The creaking, the groaning, the very specific fear of closing your eyes at night and wondering whether the floor would still be there in the morning. And this, to be absolutely clear, was just a normal Tuesday in Rome. Step outside. Add 1 million people into those waste-soaked streets, shoulder to shoulder, every direction, all day. And now you have the perfect environment for disease to do what disease does best. Tuberculosis, malaria from the mosquitoes breeding in the marshes just outside the city. Leprosy, rabies from the stray dogs and rats that owned the streets as much as the people did. And why you got sick? Well, that's when things got truly special, because waiting for you on the other side of illness was Roman medicine. And Roman medicine was, in many ways, the most dangerous thing in the entire city. Roman doctors were not, to put it gently, operating with accurate information. The entire medical system was built on the theory of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Every illness, every symptom, every condition a human body could produce was explained by an imbalance of these 4 fluids. Too much of one, not enough of another. That was it. That was the science. And the treatments that logically followed from this were exactly as horrifying as you'd expect. Feverish, they'd bleed you, literally open a vein and drain out blood, the one thing your sick, weakened body desperately needed, in the sincere belief that they were removing excess humor. Headache? Trepanation, that's a hole drilled into your skull. With the tools available in 100 AD. Difficult labor? Roman texts describe physicians giving women powdered pig feces to help with the pain. I want you to sit with that for a moment. You are in agony, you are scared, you are at your most vulnerable, and the most qualified medical professional in the greatest city in the world hands you a cup of ground-up pig waste and says, "Drink this, you'll feel better," and people drank it. Because what else were they going to do? The surgical tools were unsterilized, the rooms were filthy. Post-operative infection was so expected that it was practically factored into the treatment plan. Going under the knife in ancient Rome wasn't a last resort. It was a second illness on top of the first one. Slower, but often just as fatal. Surviving the doctors, then, was its own achievement. But the city outside wasn't done with you. Rome ran on power. And power in ancient Rome was maintained through one thing above everything else: spectacle. The Colosseum wasn't just an arena, it was a political instrument. Emperors who failed to deliver sufficiently bloody entertainment faced real consequences. A restless, angry population was a dangerous population, and the games were the pressure valve that kept the whole thing from exploding. Gladiatorial combat, animal hunts, public executions, not fringe events, not controversial. Mainstream Saturday afternoon entertainment. The whole family. And the violence didn't stay in the arena. After dark, Rome was genuinely lawless for anyone without money or status. The vigils, the Roman night watch, were understaffed, underfunded, and largely ineffective against the criminal networks that ran entire neighborhoods once the sun went down. Muggings were routine, murders were not uncommon. And if you were poor, enslaved, a woman, or a child, you had essentially no legal protection of any kind. You were on your own. Speaking of children, this might be the darkest part of everything we've covered so far. In ancient Rome, a newborn baby had 0 legal rights until its father performed a ritual called the tollens, physically lifting the child from the ground as a formal act of acceptance into the family. If the father chose not to do this, if the baby was the wrong gender, or disabled, or simply inconvenient, or there just wasn't enough food, the child would be abandoned. Left on a hillside, a street corner, a rubbish heap. This was called exposure. It was not illegal. It was not even particularly frowned upon. It was a routine, accepted, utterly normalized solution to an unwanted child. Some of those children were taken in and raised as slaves. Most weren't. The Rome of marble columns and military triumph was built on the backs of people history barely bothered to name. The slaves who cut the stone? The children left in the streets? The plebeians who lived and died in crumbling buildings above sewage-filled roads? And sitting above all of it, making everything dramatically worse whenever the opportunity arose, was the Roman political system, which was having its own completely separate catastrophe. The crisis of the 3rd century. 50 years during which the empire burned through over 20 emperors, most of whom died violently in office. Civil wars so frequent that Roman legions spent more time fighting each other than defending the borders. Provinces lost. Supply chains collapsed. Famine spreading through a population already on the edge. And into that chaos, right on cue, came the plagues. The Antonine Plague, the Plague of Cyprian. Wave after wave of devastating disease tearing through a population weakened by malnutrition, filthy living conditions, and endless warfare. The Plague of Cyprian alone is estimated to have killed 5,000 people per day in the city of Rome at its peak. 5,000 people, every single day. This was life in the greatest empire the ancient world ever produced. Not marble, not glory, not triumph, just survival. Desperate, grinding, daily survival against a city that was constantly and actively, almost personally trying to kill you. So what did all of this actually do to the people living through it? The answer is carved into their bones, literally. Archaeological excavations of Roman burial sites, and there have been thousands of them, tell a story that written history never fully captured. The skeletal remains of average Romans show chronic malnutrition starting in early childhood. Bones weakened by vitamin deficiencies, teeth ground down to almost nothing, not just by poor diet, but by the grit-filled bread Romans ate daily, ground on stone mills that shed tiny rock fragments into every single loaf. Every meal, a little more tooth gone. Every year, a little more damage done. Spinal injuries from childhood labor, joint deterioration, broken bones that healed badly because nobody set them properly, bodies that were, by the time their owners reached their mid-30s, already catastrophically worn out. The average life expectancy in ancient Rome sat somewhere between 25 and 35 years. And yes, infant mortality dragged that number down significantly. But even accounting for that, even if you survived childhood, your life expectancy only climbed to the mid-40s at best. You were considered old at 40, ancient at 50. The journey to get there had cost you almost everything your body had. But it wasn't just physical. The psychological cost of living in ancient Rome was staggering. Even if Rome had no language for psychology and wouldn't have known what you were talking about if you tried to explain it. Think about the baseline anxiety of daily life. 5,000 people dying around you every day during a plague. Your neighbor's building collapsing in the night. Watching public executions on your day off and being expected to enjoy it. Making the decision to abandon your own newborn because you simply could not afford another mouth. The emotional numbness required just to function in that environment, to get up every morning and walk back out into it, is something modern psychology would immediately recognize as severe, generational, civilization-wide trauma. In Rome, it was just called being alive. The government's solution to all of this? Distraction. The policy that the poet Juvenal famously summarized as bread and circuses, panem et circenses. Free grain and free entertainment. Keep people just fed enough not to starve and just entertained enough not to think. It was crowd control dressed up as generosity, and it worked well enough to keep the whole operation running for centuries. The wealthy, meanwhile, kept their distance from all of it. The patrician class understood that the suffering of the masses was not a problem to be solved. It was a resource to be managed. Cheap labor, disposable soldiers. When the plagues came, the rich packed up and retreated to their country estates, leaving the poor to die in the insulae and the streets. They'd return when it was over. History's first work-from-home policy, exclusively available to people who could afford a second home to work from. So why does any of this matter? Why should we care 2,000 years later, with our running water and our antibiotics and our buildings that are legally required to not collapse on us while we sleep? Because Rome didn't just fall, it warned us, and the warning was very specific. The empire didn't collapse overnight. There was no single catastrophic moment. No one battle, no one emperor, no one decision that ended it. It rotted. Slowly, visibly, over centuries. And when historians look past the surface narrative of barbarian invasions and military defeats to examine what actually caused the collapse, what they find is uncomfortably familiar. Extreme wealth inequality that hollowed out the middle class and created a permanent underclass with nothing left to lose. A political system so consumed by internal power struggles that it became structurally incapable of addressing actual problems. Public health crises the government was completely unprepared to handle. Infrastructure that had been magnificent once and was now crumbling from neglect. A population too exhausted, too beaten down, too focused on daily survival to engage with the systems that were supposed to represent them. The Romans saw it happening. Juvenal wrote about it. Tacitus wrote about it. Pliny wrote about it. The diagnosis was made repeatedly by people who lived inside the patient. The system was just too entrenched, too profitable for those at the top, to reform from within. When Rome finally fell in the West, it didn't just end an empire. It triggered one of the most dramatic collapses in human living standards ever recorded. Cities of hundreds of thousands shrank to villages of a few thousand. Roads deteriorated. Aqueducts stopped functioning. Literacy collapsed. Trade networks that had connected 3 continents dissolved within a generation. Life expectancy, already brutally low, dropped even further across large parts of Europe. The medieval period that followed was, in many ways, harder than Rome at its worst. At least Rome had been trying to build something. When that experiment ended, humanity spent roughly 1,000 years clawing its way back to where it had started. And yet, the other side of Rome's legacy is real, and it matters. Roman law gave the Western world its legal DNA, innocent until proven guilty, the right to face your accuser, the principle that laws should be written down and publicly accessible rather than living exclusively in the minds of whoever currently held power. These ideas came from Rome, imperfectly applied, brutally ignored for the poor and the enslaved, but written down, preserved. Passed forward, Roman engineering gave us structural innovations that defined architecture for 2 millennia. The Latin language became the foundation of half the languages spoken in Europe today. Roman administrative systems gave every civilization that followed a template for governing large populations across vast territories. Rome was simultaneously one of the most brutal and one of the most consequential civilizations in human history. It inflicted enormous suffering on the majority of people who lived inside it, and it generated ideas and systems that genuinely moved the human story forward. Both of those things are completely true, and holding both of them at the same time, without letting either one erase the other, is the only honest way to engage with history. The real lesson of Rome isn't about gladiators or emperors or the fall of the West. It's simpler and more uncomfortable than that. No civilization, no matter how powerful, how innovative, how apparently permanent it looks from inside, survives indefinitely the consequences of how it treats the people at the bottom. Rome forgot that. Rome paid for it. The question worth sitting with, the one that doesn't really have a comfortable answer, is whether we're paying attention this time. And that is the Rome they never taught you. Not the myth, not the marble, not the Hollywood epic with the sweeping orchestral score and the heroic last stand. The real thing. Brutal, brilliant, and far more relevant to right now than most people are comfortable admitting. But here's what I'll leave you with. Rome wasn't the only civilization history has been romanticizing while quietly hiding the horror underneath. Because right now, sitting in my uploads folder is a script about another emperor, same era, different continent, and if anything, even darker in the ways it treated the people living inside it. We went deep on it, very deep. And I promise you, if ancient Rome kept you watching this long, what's in that video is going to hit harder. Subscribe to the channel to get the update as soon as I upload that video.